Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'm Elgin Cleckley, and I'm an associate professor of architecture and the undergraduate program director. And I'm pleased to introduce our speaker for tonight, Adam Yarinsky. Adam is principal and co-founder of Architecture Research Office, ARO, a New York City firm that designs architecture to inspire people, further institutional missions, advance social equity, and promote ecological resilience. Research gives their work purpose and intention. Their architecture unites beauty and form with strategy and intelligence. ARO has received over 100 design awards, including the National AIA Architecture Firm Award, the AIA New York State Firm of the Year Award, the Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt National Design Award for Architecture, and the Architecture Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Adam holds an undergraduate degree in architecture from the University of Virginia and a Master of Architecture from Princeton University. He's taught at MIT, Harvard, University of Michigan, Princeton, and Yale. Also here at UVA as the Schur and Thomas Jefferson Visiting Professor. He served on the board of Places Journal from 2012 to 2018 and on our school's Dean's Advisory Board from 2017 to 2023. Adam received the University of Virginia's School of Architecture's Distinguished Alumni Award in 2017. In the monograph we'll hear about tonight, Architecture Research Office, Adam will present the design of the practice as a project in itself. Architecture is the firm's ultimate objective, which for ARO means creating beautifully crafted work that benefits people. Research grounds its methodology and informs its approach. An office reflects the idea that creating architecture in support of people starts with the community and culture of the firm. Key projects completed over the past 3 decades, representing the firm's diverse body of work, will be the means to describe the principles that guide ARO's work, the firm's methodology, and its culture. Just to note that this talk and exhibition, and that's located upstairs on the mezzanine, is supported by the Clark Howe Endowment, and signed copies of the book will be available for purchase after the talk, just right outside. Let's welcome Adam.
Thanks, Logan. There you go. Thank you. Well, it's great to be back. I was looking at my schedule of the last 25 years calendar, and I think this might be either the 5th or the 6th time I've spoken here. So I was trying to select projects that maybe people haven't seen already. Or maybe if I repeat one or two, they'll at least be interesting to look at again. So as Elgin said, we are a 26-person office. So I founded the office actually when I was teaching here in 1993. So this is the 32nd year. We started the firm in the fall of 1993. Kim Yao, who's the third partner in the firm, became a partner around 15 years ago. And our key leadership team probably has between 10 and 20 years in the office together, the half dozen or so people. So this work that I'm going to be showing you is really collaborative in nature, obviously not just me. And I'm going to be speaking about our office through 6 projects that are represented by or exemplify certain principles that are in the book. But I wanted to just start by saying, you know, the A, the R, and the O. So we're passionate about making architecture from planning to buildings to details. And we have a very diverse, deliberately diverse body of work. And it really encompasses the social process of how people use space and the physical process and relationship between buildings and their sites and their contexts. I said in the interview that was posted on the UVA A-School website last fall when the book was published, that we think about architecture expansively in terms of this diversity of work, holistically in terms of the integration of scales, systems, materials, program through design, and then relationally in terms of how we create buildings and spaces that ultimately support relationships between things. And I think that'll be exemplified by the projects I show. This is united by a process of research, which is really just about asking questions from the scale of the material to programmatic to issues of strategies, and even asking, why a building to begin with. And then the culture within the office is again, extremely important, not just because we think of the office as a project, but because we like to practice the ethos of collaboration and engagement directly, with each other on a daily basis, as well as with our clients and collaborators. So the book is really represents sort of our body of work. There are about 30 projects in it, but they're organized into 7 principles, 6 of which have projects associated with them. And the principles are truisms if they're just read, independent of the work. And so what I'll try to do is sort of explain why I think they're specifically relevant to our practice and to the projects and the work that we do. They're also interrelated. So, one project could embody all of the principles. So we had a lot of discussions about where to put projects. Fundamentally, though, they reflect, an ethical underpinning to the work, which is really important. And so the projects I've selected tonight are by and large projects that are in the public realm, or if they're for organizations, they're in support of missions that benefit the public and enhance the quality of life for people who use them. So again, table of contents principles, and I'll start with strategize for maximum impact. So what do we mean by this? We don't automatically think that every problem immediately should be thought of as being solved by a building. So we think about more expansively about design being strategic in nature. And the project I'll be showing you is one that really deals with public space and infrastructure, not design of a building per se. And we think this ends up giving architecture more impact and agency. The other thing is that we value our collaborators. So whether they're other architects sometimes, or specialists or consultants and clients, we like to genuinely look at the breadth of who's involved in the project and see where the contributions that they can offer can most benefit the outcome of the project, as opposed to simply be in service to our agenda or an a priori formal agenda. So the project that I'm going to be showing you is one that we did in 2009, 2010, called the New Urban Ground. It was a collaboration with Susanna Drake, landscape architect, looking at climate change in the upper harbor of New York and New Jersey. And it was preceded by research that we did as part of a team led by Guy Nordenson, structural engineer, to look at the upper harbor in New York and New Jersey in the context of rising sea levels and storm surges, and begin to think of this as a new regional center. So there were a number of other collaborators involved as well. But ultimately, this was about rethinking how the city, its relationship to the water itself, and which is much more dynamic than it was at any other point in history. So I won't get into all these names, but the Latrobe work ended up being part of having a number of implications, but the most direct one immediately was in terms of framing a series of workshops and exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art that were called Rising Currents. And we were selected, ARO, and then we asked Susanna Drake to join us to look at the tip of Manhattan and lower Manhattan in the context of climate change. So again, here, a book that we published about the Palisades Bay work, the Rising Currents catalog, and then image of the installation, and then the workshops that we had there at the museum. So there were 4 other teams looking at other areas around the harbor, and then we were team 0, the tip of Manhattan. But essentially, we were looking at the entire watershed of lower Manhattan and the kind of transformation of the island from a gradient kind of from between land and water to one with a hard seawall that was all completed roughly in the end of the 19th century. And of course, Manhattan was mostly commercial around its perimeter, if not exclusively, and only in recent years now has it become, publicly accessible. But basically, we were looking at 2 fundamental issues. One is the fact that whenever it rains in New York City, there are huge outflows of sewage into the harbor because New York City has a combined storm sanitary sewer. And then at the same time, in the event of a storm surge, a large area of lower Manhattan would be flooded, especially in the future, decades when the baseline water level is higher to begin with. So we saw some of this during Superstorm Sandy, which was a few years after our project. But essentially, so dealing with both the outflow of rain and the inflow of water and rising sea level. And what came out of this was basically a network of streets that absorbed, distributed, and stored stormwater and helped mitigate the flow of water in as well as rainwater out, and then a series of wetlands that process this water around the perimeter of the island. And really looking at the entire watershed. This is a cross section through from East River on the right to the Hudson River on the left. And basically, I won't get into the detail, but basically the streets were transformed from areas to park vehicles to new porous pavement and relocation of infrastructure to allow for streets to have this capacity both to, again, absorb water or distribute it, and then in some cases around the perimeter of the island, store that water before it was discharged into the wetlands. And this is one of the streets details. Another of them here. The reason why I'm not going into great detail is some of this is explained in the book or in the other books, but also I'm mindful of the time. But these visualizations were really important, and I think strategically in terms of the public engagement with the exhibition to begin as architects to make people aware of the possibilities, not just of mitigating problems, but also envisioning a different way in which to relate to the natural realm around the island of Manhattan. So what ultimately came out of the project was a design that we call the New Urban Ground, which was a kind of radical rethinking of the relationship between New York City and the water, and a rethinking of streets as part of a kind of green web that extended in from the perimeter of the island as far as the watershed, and connecting both Manhattan or the urban residents back to the perimeter as well. And the impact of this was felt just a couple of short years later with Superstorm Sandy, when there had been a number of participants in the workshops and visitors to the exhibition who were in at New York City Planning and New York State and other organizations. So it informed a response to the damage that was caused by Superstorm Sandy, and led to some of the projects that are taking shape now. I mean, they're tremendously challenging in terms of the negotiation between and the expense. But the Big U project, which is partially completed now around Lower Manhattan, is one example of that. And then it also led to future consulting that we did, our office did as part of a team, to look at housing typologies in New York and the damage that they sustained and how to mitigate that damage in the future, which is very challenging, particularly for small buildings in the city. So that was a report that we did in the year or two following Sandy. So approaching architecture as a social act is something that has a few implications for us. One is that we have a process of engagement with people who are going to use and be affected by the project. So we ask questions, we talk to people, we listen to what they say. And also we envision that architecture is a means of connecting people to each other and fostering community and shared aspirations. And in many respects also, in this project I'll be showing you is indicative of this. It also is about symbolizing and enabling and embodying the identity of organizations or people that bring people together in different ways. So CBST Synagogue is the largest LGBTQ synagogue in the world. It was founded in 1973. And we were charged with designing a new home for this place, which actually never had a place of worship that was visible or widely seen in the public realm. They were inside of a building called West Beth. They had a small synagogue there. And we coupled this project with, we assisted them in developing their program, but also in finding a space to occupy, which they purchased. And they ended up, after a year or more search, finding space at the base of this building. It's an amazing Cass Gilbert building, an individual landmark in kind of Midtown South Manhattan. And the ground floor and basement space that they found made it affordable. And also the very tall ceilings made it possible for them to have their program in the building. And what they were particularly excited about was having a street presence so that they could actually be visible and engage the community directly. They have a very strong social justice mission as well as the worship. So this is a cross section through the building. You can see the upper level sanctuary is in the back of the space, and I'll explain more about this tilted wall in the sanctuary space. And then the lower level is a chapel and social and classroom spaces. The lobby has a waiting area, and part of the logic of there are landmark rules that you can't put certain new elements within a certain distance of the facade. So setting back the vestibule wall with the lavender wall that kind of is part of their identity onto the street was in keeping with the sort of thinking strategically about how to embody their mission and balance that with constraints of a landmark building. These are actually flags that were sewn by Gilbert Baker, but they were original flags that have more stripes than the current stripe, in case you're wondering. And then these connections, so the tall height of the ground floor space allowed for a mezzanine, so additional seating in the sanctuary, which you'll see in a moment, and then incorporating elements from that they had in their prior much smaller sanctuary space. So one of the challenges of working within this existing building, it's a roughly 20-story building, is there are columns that can't be taken out, and so you're trying to make gathering space. You have to be strategic about how you organize that space. We developed a custom seating with a British company that makes pews for houses of worship that can be moved, because this space also functions for life cycle events and social events as well as worship. And tried to create as compact space as possible. So this is a space together with the mezzanine level above that seats 300 people, but in close proximity to the ark and the bema at the front of the space. So you're never more than 35 feet away. And then you can see the center column in the space actually has the eternal light, which is an element within Jewish houses of worship that is embedded into the column as well. So there are only a couple of dictates in the Torah about sanctuary spaces, but one of them is that you have to have windows somehow connect to the outside. And so this is challenging to do when you're at the bottom of a very tall building, and also one that has an FAR, which is the floor area ratio that's capped. So you can't actually add any additional space. You can't push extend the walls outward in plan. So we basically tilted the back wall of the sanctuary to bring in daylight. And the wall, I'll explain a little bit more about the composition of the wall, but it's basically clad in glass fiber reinforced concrete panels that are ribbed, which create a light and shadow. And you'll see in a second the way in which that plays out at different times of day. So this is in a morning, lights coming from the east. And certain times of year, of course, you get direct light. Other times of year, it's indirect. But this play of light really animates the space and creates that kind of direct connection to the heavens, if you will. And one of the qualities, so this congregation has their high holiday services at the Javits Center because they have so many members who come. It's probably like in Christian churches, many more people come at Christmas and Easter than they come on a weekly basis. So one of the things that people commented on when we talked to them was the incredible sunsets. The Javits Center faces west. It's on the Hudson River on the west side of Manhattan. And this was an attempt to sort of connect back again to that light, to the qualities of sky in a way that would be direct. The other thing is music is a really important part of their worship, and they have a choir part of the congregation. So the wall that's sloped was developed so that it would be acoustically performative to allow for spoken voice and singing to not need amplification in the space. And so we work closely with acoustical consultant Threshold Acoustics, who we worked on a number of projects, who tested this. And basically that's a 1/3 size wall because it functions the same if it's a smaller size as a larger. It was tested for fabrication. And here you can see kind of a diagram of the sound waves. This very massive wall that's behind those flat concrete panels actually blocks the noise from a series of HVAC equipment condensers that are directly behind it as well in the kind of exterior backyard space, so to speak, behind the building. And then this is an image of worship happening in the sanctuary with the choir. So the arc in the space is kind of has 3 layers of enclosure because the space is used for secular events and the Torahs that are inside, can't be exposed during those times. So the outside is a steam bent oak series of panels that slide open. And then there's an inner fabric panel that's woven silver, gold, and natural fiber by an artist collective in Colombia. And the Rabbi Kleinbaum, who's since retired, she was there for over 30 years, said that one of the characteristics of the congregation was having elements like this, which could be fabulous. So this is this kind of glittering special thing that you see when you slide that panel to the side. And then we designed a paraquet, which is the inner curtain for the Torahs, that was based upon a Syrian frieze, basically made of very fine paper, but basically this was laser cut fabric. So this is an image of just the process of development of that. Sorry, it was from Spain, not Syria. So it was kind of abstraction of this into this larger pattern. Again, on many levels, and I didn't show you images of the door handles, which were custom, and some other elements, but I'll show a few others as we. So this is a stair down, again, columns in the space, connecting the lobby to the lower level social spaces. And again, embedding, in this case, quotes from the writing of Walt Whitman into the terrazzo floor finish of the steps, so that there are multiple layers of how the identity of this organization is communicated through the building. This is an elevator that we put in to connect the mezzanine lower level and main level. Again, a custom wallpaper from Walt Whitman again, or actually laminate, I should say. And then the lower level chapel space, which has a similar steam bent wood, as well as this is kind of a multi-purpose space. It's a boardroom, library, and a chapel space, and incorporates an historic arc as well. And then these are inclusive restrooms, which were really one of the earliest or first ones in the city that are each stall is private, but then a shared washing area. And this was really important because although we could have had these type of restrooms approved by the building department without a variance by using different machinations in the New York City building code. The rabbi felt it was really important to actually have the Department of Buildings go on record as supporting inclusive restrooms. And so I may have just run out. Switch to this. Yeah. Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me? How's this? Oh, how's that? Oh. All sound has stopped. I can just talk loud. Testing. Oh, you can hear that. Okay, good. All right, this died. Hold on. Let me take this out. Can you hear me all right now? No, it's not close enough. Okay, let me put this. Oh, okay. I can just hold it for a moment. Anyway, while I'm doing all this, you can see both the signage that's in the restroom as well as another example of incorporating some of the history of the congregation into the laminate within the restroom area. But so it was important to both the process of how the building was approved and also ultimately to the outcome, of course, of having these inclusive restrooms. That was a key part of the project. The third principle, which is engage the complexity of context, for us, this relates to both physical and social context, and which encompasses both site and existing conditions, as well as if it's an existing building or an existing context that we're working within, the mission of an organization, and really is about a kind of reciprocity between the architecture and a relationship between what we create and the existing conditions. The book's finally coming in handy. There, you can put that there. If nothing else, this. Project I'm going to be talking about is the ongoing process or ongoing project for the renovation and expansion of the Rothko Chapel in Houston, Texas. So the most recent phase of which was just completed a few weeks ago, or the landscape is in the process of being completed. So the Rothko Chapel is located in a really interesting part of Houston. Have any of you been to the Rothko Chapel before? Yeah, so good. So I'll try to explain it quickly, but essentially the product of philanthropists, John and Dominique Tamil, as well as the artist, Mark Rothko, to create a sacred space, but one that is fundamentally grounded in a residential neighborhood, kind of really interesting physical context. And the chapel is both a place and a program. It's a place in terms of this spiritual space that Rothko created with his 14 monumental painted panels, but it's also a program in support of social justice as well as dialogue between people generally and between faiths as well. And it's a really beloved institution in Houston. So it was designed by Philip Johnson, although he withdrew from the project because of his disputes with Mark Rothko, who wanted a much more modest building than Johnson's design. But essentially, it's embedded within a 1920s residential neighborhood in Houston. And one of the interesting things when we were looking at the archives of the chapel is this was also like all of Houston, it was a very segregated neighborhood. So the deeds, you actually see in the deeds that, no one except Caucasians are allowed to own houses in this neighborhood. So it's pretty radical in terms of situating this in this place and its potential, sort of transformative potential to bring people together. I should say the other thing is the chapel itself is this inner kind of introspective place. Actually, no, sorry, it's coming up in a second. So the Rothko Chapel owns not just the chapel, but grounds around it, as well as several of the houses across the way. And then these other buildings that are in kind of purple are actually owned by the Menil Collection, which was a separate institution that the Menils set up after the chapel. And so the neighborhood's really interesting. The Menils painted all of these buildings white, gray with white trim. So it's a kind of really fascinating kind of unity and diversity, and a kind of unusual context that forms a kind of necklace of buildings around both the chapel as well as what was to become later the original first Menil Collection building, which was designed by Renzo Piano. So again, the chapel is this really interesting dialectic between contemplation within and then action. So in terms of social justice, which is represented by Barnett Newman's broken obelisk statue, which is dedicated to Martin Luther King. So there's this really interesting, again, reciprocity between the two, but also kind of dialectic at the core of their mission. Our project involved both restoration of and renovation of the chapel, very holistically, which primarily had to do with improving the quality of daylight in the space. So Mark Rothko painted the Rothko Chapel paintings, but he did not ever go to Houston. He was not aware how bright the sunlight was in Houston. He painted them in New York City in a studio that he created, and then he died before the chapel opened. So he never saw the paintings installed. And almost from the first moment they were installed, the upper left corner, there was way too much sunlight in the space. So both over time, relatively quickly damaged the paintings, as well as made it really impossible to see the kind of depth of these paintings. They're really unusual. They're like portals, essentially, or sort of voids that you look through. So if you haven't been, I recommend at some point, if you're in Houston, definitely go. But so they're extremely unusual, but they rely upon and require a kind of adjustment of your eye to begin to take in their qualities. They're very layered in terms of the coloration and the depth that the paintings have. So a series of attempts were made through the years, most recent one on the from 1999 on the lower right, to mitigate the brightness, and but all of them had issues with either blocking the space entirely and the kind of connection to the sky, or creating glare, which you see in the lower right. So we worked closely with George Sexton, who's a lighting designer based in New York City, or sorry, in Washington, D.C., who specializes in daylighting as well as lighting, to create a new infrastructure and new skylight and new lighting that would allow the space to be open but block direct light and cast light indirectly on all of the perimeter walls of the space, as well as incorporate within the periphery of the skylight a series of digital projectors. So in very low light conditions, allow for the entire walls that the paintings are on. There are 8 projectors to be illuminated by these digital projectors, although the preferred mode is definitely daylight in the space. This is the completed interior. The chapel was completed in 2021, part of the first phase of construction. Those tabs projecting down are actually mirrors which bounce the light from the projector toward each wall. And then a view of landscape. So Nelson Burr-Waltz is actually the landscape architect for this project, and working very closely with them, because the chapel actually faces into the center of the block, and you enter into this space from multiple locations. And so the development of different landscape spaces around the building is part of how your sequence to and from it is mediated. It doesn't happen through architecture exclusively. Another view of the chapel grounds. And what's notable is this kind of juxtaposition of the familiar with the exceptional, the kind of everyday residential neighborhood with the chapel, is that the chapel grounds are very porous to the surrounding houses and neighborhood, deliberately so. And that there's a kind of non-design, we called it an aesthetics of the found, where the Menils, who had the capacity to probably redesign everything in the neighborhood and the wealth to do that, chose not to. They wanted there to be this kind of friction between the two that would be important to both prompt you to wonder why and to, in a way, embody this kind of tension between the two, the dialectic between the sacred and the everyday. So the final plan, we both did a feasibility study and then renovation of the existing building, as well as a planning study for a new North Campus to support the chapel with expanded programming and spaces for their offices, as well as a new welcome house to take some of the program that formerly happened in the vestibule of the chapel and give it a new small building to create a more sacred kind of experience of entering and leaving the chapel. That North Campus is in the process of being built. So the and really what we try to do through the new architecture of the North Campus is basically balance this institutional presence of the chapel with the surrounding neighborhood, while still maintaining the kind of exceptional quality of the original chapel building. So it's both communicating its identity of the chapel to these new structures, but also mediating between the neighborhood and the chapel. So the parapet height of these new buildings is set by the parapet of the chapel, and the kind of scale and mass of the buildings is also set by them. These are sections through a new program space that's roughly the same size as the chapel building. This is an aerial view looking toward the North Campus from the south. And what's being constructed right now, actually to the left of the chapel, is a new meditation garden. The plants for that are actually going in even as we speak. So part of the project involved removing existing bungalows that the chapel owned adjacent to the building to create these spaces of kind of arrival and meditation outside adjacent to the building. And then this is also completed in 2021 was the Welcome House, which is here, which incorporates a bit of the original St. Joe brick from the chapel building, as well as a large projecting shade for when groups come and go and arrive at the chapel before they enter in, but gives you a clear line of sight back to the broken obelisk and the plaza in front of the chapel. And we really conceived of the Welcome House as a kind of porch-like building, so it has a very small scale that relates to the character and scale of these surrounding adjacent 1920s bungalows. And it has restrooms, it has a welcome desk, it has a small bookstore, lockers, so you can leave your possessions in there if you want to go over to the chapel. And then the materiality of the rest of the building, the administration and archives building to the right, as well as the program building behind, really draws from both the color palette and also the materiality of the houses in the neighborhood. So we've, in other projects in Martha's Vineyard and in Connecticut, developed facades that sort of cast shadows on themselves. One of the things we found so amazing in the neighborhood are these beautiful live oak trees, which create a dappled light that falls everywhere. And so this cladding strategy and these kind of siding that's two different depths emulates that in some respect. This is a view looking toward the program space from the street. So this new plaza that this ensemble of buildings forms invites you in from the street. So it's different than the broken obelisk plaza in terms of just being much more open to the street, different kind of gathering. This is the program center. This phase of construction is going to start in several months. The construction drawings are done, and again, has a direct view back to the chapel. Will be used for a variety of events, not to take the place of the events that happen in the chapel, but to allow additional events to happen without making the chapel inaccessible for private or personal meditation. And then the plaza, again, occupied by people. So this is from about a month or so ago. I don't have good photographs of this, but basically the administration and archive building has been completed. And that red dashed line is the facade, the future facade of the program center, which is going to be built, which will extend an existing structure that was built in the first phase, which is called an energy house, basically has emergency generator and other HVAC equipment for the chapel building, which was part of our work in the earlier phase. So elevate the ordinary is pretty obvious, but basically one of the things that we love doing is working within constraints and tight budgets, but being creative about how we work with space and material. And so that's why it's exciting to see some of the projects out in the lobby. The sort of, we're still doing that in different forms, in different ways, in different projects, but working with very limited means and trying to maximize their expressive potential. In fact, this project, which I just stuck in quickly as an aside, was actually something I worked on when I was teaching here in 1993. And it's still extant. It doesn't look exactly like this, but it's a steel plate fence on the corner of Thompson and Broome Street in Soho. But it was very much about modulating movement along the street and responding to a vehicular sort of street and a pedestrian street at this corner. But the project I'll show you is a small building we did that's part of a park that was designed by Reed Hildebrand, landscape architects, in Beacon, New York. And it was completed in 2011, I believe. A former brownfield site along the Hudson River. Beacon's around 65 miles or so north of New York City, and was one of two projects in the park that we worked on. The other one being the renovation of a mid-19th century barn into an environmental and multi-purpose building. But I'm going to be talking about the kayak pavilion there, which basically is all about the transition from between land and water, but marked by a kind of very simple framing of the view and passage through the orientation of boards that define a deck that is the kind of floor level, if you will, and platform on which the building sits, and then a kind of floating roof plane made out of differently oriented corrugated metal panels that are suspended from a structure above, and then a series of aluminum grills that enclose the kayaks. So this is an image of the building in construction. So suspending this kind of galvanized steel structure, very lightweight structure. So because it had no enclosed space, the structure could be quite light and almost, as non-present in terms of the vertical structure as possible. This is a view from first phase of the park looking back to the water. You approach this from a couple of different vantage points, but this is from between a couple of berms that are also part of a resiliency strategy for the park. And then this is a view looking toward the water from the park itself, framed by the open area, which also provides shade when you're entering and leaving the water. Another view, again, closer in below that roof. And then looking back where you can see, so part of the orientation of these grills was to obscure the boats, except when you're looking straight on each of the grills. When these grills open and close to provide access to the boats, they sort of slip out from beyond the roof plane. Very simple speed rail system that just holds up different boats and then stores them. And then another view looking back from the water. So essentially taking a really simple program, and an activity that people do on a regular basis, at least if you live near the water, which is to go to and from, but trying to elevate it through architecture that is purposeful in terms of its program of storing boats, but also is very much about this kind of framing of passage literally and experientially between water and land. And here you can actually see there's a solar array on top of the roof that powers the barn as well. So design for use and experience is one that seems very obvious. We think about it mostly a lot of times in terms of program and how programs we design for programs and the function of and relationship between spaces, but also we think about it in terms of qualities of a space, so material qualities and spatial qualities, and that enhance how you experience and use a space. So a recently completed project that this lies at the core of the kind of mission is a renovation of 3 buildings in Chelsea neighborhood of Manhattan for DIA, which is an art foundation based in New York City, but has some sites outside of the city as well, like Lightning Field in New Mexico among them. And this project was about the renewal of existing buildings and the upgrading of them to accommodate museum quality environmental controls and humidification, which required us to put new facades on 2 of the buildings, as well as, of course, incorporate new HVAC systems. And then creating a new public entry lobby and spaces for DIA in the base of the 6-story building that DIA also owns, as well as their own offices. So I'll talk more about this, but basically it's rendered in 2 different kinds of brick, the tall building using brick that matches the rest of the building, and then the 2 other structures using an iron spot brick, but that both creates a sort of distinction between each of these buildings, which are independent, but then they're kind of have a connection within and also a relationship, particularly between the 2 buildings on the left in terms of the scale of their openings. So these buildings are, again, they're about kind of creating a street frontage that allows each structure to be independent, but then connected as well. And Chelsea is an interesting area because DIA was one of the pioneers here 40 years ago or so. But now there are literally dozens of commercial art galleries. And so what does it mean for DIA to come back here? And part of what they've done is have free admission in Chelsea, which really reduces the barrier to entry completely, essentially, and allows them, because all of the commercial galleries are, of course, free as well. But it's also about welcoming the public in to the new entry lobby that we created. The center building has a hydraulically tilting door that can allow for events to spill out into the street, as well as bringing art in and out of for installations. And then the building on the left has a series of sliding tall glass panels that allows the same kind of bringing of art in and out as well. We were very mindful of DIA's identity, particularly with respect to DIA Beacon, where Robert Irwin created a new entry building. And we wanted to kind of reference that in a simple way through just how we articulated some of the brick on this building, and gave depth to the emergency exits. The doors have to be set in a certain distance so that you don't hit someone when they open, but this gives more depth for these egress doors and allowed us to kind of articulate the depth of the wall. The walls are actually not load bearing, but they're multi-layered because they have water barrier or air barriers and insulation because of the humidification inside the building. And this is the sequence of spaces. So entry lobby on the right, called a talk space, and infrastructure for restrooms and mechanical space, and then the center gallery, and then the west gallery on the left, which are connected within, but still maintain their sort of distinct character, which I'll show you, but that's just both constructionally through the different materiality, as well as just the quality of space, which is very different. We also designed and built DIA's offices on 2 floors of the building that they own. On the right, the upper 2 floors of the building, they relocated from a lower floor. And that's just an image of their offices, which again are infused with daylight. So daylight is really the thing that you experience directly in the space. DIA's mission is really supporting the vision of artists through long-term installations in the space that allow you to come back over numerous times and understand and see the art under different conditions, seasonally or temporally, in terms of the day even. And so that's really what changes in terms of the experience of the space, and daylight is a big part of that. So in order to keep these exterior spaces or interior spaces unencumbered, we located all of the ductwork outside of the building. It's all insulated, and then have discrete registers within the structure, and did new skylights. They were all existing skylights that were replaced with more efficient insulated units. So this is the entry lobby. This building has a concrete clad steel structure. We located all of the ducts to the sides, so there aren't any ducts visible in the space. And then they also have a bookstore in this area. And then these columns march through the lobby all the way back into the talk space, which is a flexible space, seats about 150 people, and also has daylight in the back of it. So there can be daylight brought into that space, and you get a view from front to back of this space all the way to the street. And then the entry lobby looking toward the middle gallery. This is a Dan Flavin piece that's part of Dia's collection, which is a reference to an earlier Flavin that they had in the building that they renovated and occupied when they first came into the Chelsea neighborhood, which was a tall, multicolored Dan Flavin sculpture. The center gallery space with the view of the doors into the western gallery on the lower left. And this is an installation. The first installation, the show when the Dia opened in 2021 was Lucy Raven, who's an artist, really interesting artist. This center space has typically been used for darker installations because it has fewer skylights. So in this case, she blackened them out completely. There's a series of illuminated, almost like spotlights that moved through the space, moving. This is a sound installation by Camille Normant that was in the space, second installation. And these installations are up for 6 months or longer at times. So they become, and the artists have a lengthy process of working with the space and working with the curators at Dia to envision how to install their pieces within the space. This is that Western gallery with these bowstring trusses and very minimally installed lighting infrastructure by a great lighting designer, Suzanne Tillotson, that allows a lot of flexibility of how this can be used. And this was, again, Lucy Raven. She has an amazing film and Panavision of a cement quarry in Idaho that with a sound installation as well. So there was this kind of huge, almost like a drive-in movie screen there. This was the Camille Normant show that came after that, which was, again, sound vibrated through these wooden elements. And then this one was one of the more recent ones. It's by Delcy Morelos, who's a Colombian artist, but that literally filled the entire space up. So this kind of land art brought inside and kind of just filling the entire space with this. And you could actually touch it and smell it. Amazing character that it had. So the last project I'll talk about is one that, is recently completed public school in school buildings in New York City, which encompass this notion of integrity on an urban level in terms of how they reinforce and resolve kind of their urban context, on a social level in terms of, public education being the program, but then also on an environmental level, these are passive house buildings, so they're very, very energy efficient. So really part of the forefront in the New York City of setting a new standard for energy efficiency in public buildings and buildings in general. So this is a site. It's actually along Flatbush, which is a commercial corridor through Brooklyn, in a rapidly gentrifying and built up area here and in downtown Brooklyn, which actually coincidentally our office is located in. Although when we started on this project, we weren't located in Brooklyn. It began in 2016. It was completed in the fall of 2024. But the site, which was redeveloped by a company called Alloy, which is an architect-led development company, is on a seam between Boerum Hill, which is kind of brownstone Brooklyn, and then commercial part of downtown Brooklyn. And so this site encompasses both existing historic buildings, the two new schools, as well as two new towers that one of which has been built. So the school, and these are not great, unfortunately, but you'll see from the photographs in a minute, the school buildings are a high school, Khalil Gibran International Academy, which is the city's only Arabic language public high school, seats 500 students, and then a primary school that's a Spanish English dual language school that is for 350 students, and that is located on the quieter side of the property of the block facing State Street, and the high school is on Flatbush Avenue and articulated differently. This tower is the first one that's complete, and then the second one that you can barely see is going to start construction shortly. They're residential. So these schools were built as part of a rezoning of the block that the developers sought, and in return for increased floor area ratio and doing these buildings, they put these two schools onto the site, which are, a public use. The tower, which I won't talk about behind the school building in this photo, is the city's first all-electric residential tower and very energy efficient. And the second tower that they're in the process of getting ready to start construction on will be the first passive house tower, or maybe the second one in the city. There's one on Roosevelt Island as part of Cornell's campus there, but this one will be quite a bit taller. So this is Flatbush Corridor and Khalil Gibran International Academy. The building is articulated as this kind of cube that you see as you approach from either direction, sort of giving it a sort of civic quality. The primary school and the high school interlock programmatically in the building. It's a real puzzle of how they fit together. There's a gymnatorium on the lower level on the left of the elementary school that you can see into. And then there's a gym on the top of the building that's for the high school. And then the elementary school floors are these blue ones that interlock with high school spaces. Really, the only infrastructure that the schools share is the commercial kitchen, because the primary school kids are so much smaller than high school kids. They don't really have the same classrooms. And then they of course, share the gyms and the gymnatorium. So passive house, I don't know, are any of you familiar with passive house as a strategy? But basically, it's a super well insulated envelope, no thermal bridging in terms of losing heat in that way, and then is very airtight, and then uses a recycling of indoor air to reduce the amount of power needed to condition new air to bring into the space. So it's mechanically ventilated. But this strategy had never been done by the School Construction Authority, which was our client for this project. So it's kind of setting a new paradigm for this type of project and this type of building. The two buildings together are about 130,000 square feet. Basically are now on track for what's called the Passive House Low Building Energy Standard. So it's not quite Passive House Classic, because you'll see in a second the complexity of getting this to the number of air changes required for that standard. But we got very close, but we're now in what they call low building energy, Passive House International Low Building Energy Standard. And one of the challenges for this type of project in an urban context, even a new building like this, is all of the different envelope conditions that this building has with its both existing and concurrently constructed buildings and future buildings to be built. So I won't get into this in detail, but essentially very complex problem to solve in the city, particularly for a building of this scale. It also has retail spaces that are outside of the boundary of the passive house and that are part of the program as well. So, and I should say also part of the challenge of this project was the School Construction Authority has almost 1,000-page long manual for the design and standards of their schools. So at one point, someone in our office actually knew all of this and nearly lost their mind, but they literally everything is prescribed. So where the opportunity for kind of creativity comes is both in solving the problem of how we get the maximum number of classrooms into the building, but also the architectural expression of the exterior of the building, which in our case was about sort of this repetitive, almost a residential scale window unit that uh, becomes, through just sheer repetition and how it's handled in different orientations and facades, the kind of identity of the school. And then the brick as well. The School Construction Authority builds to like 100-year lifespan. So super robust wall construction and concrete block backup and all of that. And these details, matter a lot. These window details matter a lot when you're doing a passive house. They're super important to the performance of the building. This is a view of the State Street side of the building, the primary school, which has a small entry court that you enter into. So for sort of drop off and pickup of kids, kids who are in K through 5 don't typically are coming with their parents or caregiver to the school. And so it's quieter street. This is the gymnatorium space, which is one level down. It has telescoping bleachers. Fun fact is my daughter teaches 7th grade middle school in Brooklyn, and she actually came into the space for a debate tournament that she had with her students last year. So that was kind of cool. I hadn't realized they were opening the building up to folks from outside of the immediate population in the school. And then stairways. Stairs are a big thing. Obviously, most kids take the stairs. There's elevators as well, but the primary school stairs. The actual interiors, virtually every part of the material and layout of the space is prescribed, but we use these windows, transoms and side lights to bring borrowed light into the corridors. And then most New York City schools have outdoor play areas. A lot of times they're elevated above the building. So this is the elementary school play area, which is enclosed on the State Street side of the building. And then the Flatbush Avenue side, again, the articulation of this volume, the future tower is going to actually be behind this historic older school building, which Khalil Gibran formerly occupied. It didn't have a gym or any kind of large common spaces. The future tower will be kind of behind that building and accessed through the gap between our building and that existing building. And then this is from a plaza that's across Flatbush. The facade, the gym is located behind that clear story of glass above the building. The lobby for most high school students commute to school, so they're not located in the neighborhood. So they're coming in through this Flatbush side, and this is the lobby for the high school. And there's also a percent for art programs. This is a really interesting sculpture by an Iranian American artist named Afrouz Amigi, which is based upon Khalil Gibran's Magic Carpet, stained glass piece. And then this is the gymnasium on the upper level of the building, facing that's all north light into the building. And then one of the high school classrooms, again, very generic on the inside because of all the standards, but you get a quality of daylight that you get within the space. And then this is the high school cafeteria that faces a plaza that overlooks Flatbush. And actually Nelson Bird Woltz were landscape architects on this project as well, although the scope was somewhat limited given the urban context. This is that plaza looking back toward the Williamsburg Savings Bank building, which is that was like the first tower in Brooklyn in the 1920s, and then a more recent building on the left. So I'm going to wrap up, sorry, I went a little bit long, with just some current projects that we have underway. So the Always Keep Learning piece for us is really ultimately driven by the projects we have at hand, which are, as before, a diverse range of projects, and the fact that we approach them with a sense of inquiry and questions, but also the environment of the studio, and that we foster an atmosphere of mentoring and of growth for the people who are working in the office. So recently completed projects, actually this one's also with Nelson Bird Woltz. It's a new mass timber visitors center at Olana, which is the Frederick Church historic site in upstate New York. Small building, but important role to orient visitors to the site. This building we haven't had photographed professionally yet, but it's a new visitor center for Greenwood Cemetery. Greenwood is a really interesting cultural landscape that has several 100,000 people buried in it from the entire history of New York City, and was a precursor to kind of public parks, the city. This building is located across the street, but with a custom designed terracotta facade. And then this is a building project that's renewing several spaces around it at Harvard Medical School and creating a new atrium between 3 existing buildings, as well as a new wing of meeting spaces made out of mass timber trusses. And this will be a skylit sort of central organizing and convening space for researchers and faculty and students. And then this is a project we're doing at Rice University right now, which is a new business school in which we're building adjacent to the west quad of the campus and actually adding to a Robert A.M. Stern building from 2004. So a historic artifact at this point, but really working with the fact that business schools today are very different than they were, 20 years ago, and creating spaces for people to connect outside of the classroom, as well as for the fact that Rice is starting a new undergraduate business major. It's also unusual in terms of having both graduate business students and undergraduates in the same building. So a number of things that this project is navigating. And then this is kind of in the vein of the project in Beacon, a new dock house for the 79th Street boat basin on the west side of Manhattan. This project will start construction in about a year, but it's part of a much larger expansion and renovation of the existing marina. This is both overnight boaters as well as day boaters and education, waterfront education programs and other things as well. But kind of also paradigmatic of the fact that any of these structures of this type now have to be elevated above flood level because of the storm surges. And then this one, which you saw a glimpse of actually in this last interior, is completely on a different scale, but keeping with sort of longstanding interest in sort of the body and human scale. This was a kind of pandemic project that I did, which is a small, affordable wooden stool that was a kind of exploration of form and material and fabrication process as well. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.